Let me just get this out of the way right at the beginning. Some people didn't like Star Trek Picard, and that's okay. Not that you were asking my permission, but just so we know where we all stand. I liked it. Not everybody did. Not everybody has to like it. It's a matter of opinion. The thing is, while I respect that the folks who didn't like Picard have a right to their opinions, some of the reasons they cite for not liking it don't really make sense to me. For example, when people complain about how Star Trek Picard ruined Starfleet. Because Starfleet is supposed to be where all the good guys work. Starfleet officers are heroes. They're noble. They're honest. The human ones are the shining examples of how the people of Earth have, as Captain Picard himself once said, grown out of their infancy. They're curious and rational and free of prejudice and bigotry. And while that has obviously been the case for most of the heroes of the various iterations of Star Trek over the years, I don't know, I feel like those who blame the Picard series for tarnishing the heretofore unblemished image of Starfleet are forgetting a few things. Starfleet hasn't always behaved so honorably. In fact, it's been responsible for enough questionable things throughout the history of the franchise that I'm compelled to ask, is Starfleet actually the bad guy? Let's start by taking a look at what Starfleet did in Star Trek Picard that was so bad. It banned synthetic life forms and abandoned the evacuation of Romulus prior to their planet being destroyed by a supernova. Okay, that's pretty bad. It's really bad. It's so bad that it can't be explained away as the result of a few bad apples running a scam. That's important because the bad apple explanation is one that Star Trek has relied on before to show us villains from within the ranks of the heroes while still trying to preserve the essential goodness of the institution. It turns out there are a few bad apples pulling strings behind the scenes during the events of Star Trek Picard, Commodore O being the primary one that we see, but the show also makes a point of establishing that the synth ban and the cancellation of the Romulan rescue effort didn't happen just because poor innocent Starfleet was led astray by a handful of villains. To achieve their goals, the villains exploited fears and prejudices that were already there. Anti-Romulan bigotry, mistrust of synthetic organisms. Commodore O is a bad person who uses her position within Starfleet to do bad things, but she alone didn't decide to ban synths or abandon the Romulans. Presumably, some council or other legislative body had to vote on these issues at some point. And I'm guessing not everyone who voted against the synths and the rescue armada was a secret agent of the Zhat Vash. What happened to our bright, hopeful future, free of prejudice and inequality? What happened to our heroic Starfleet? Personally, I don't think anything happened to them because even at its most optimistic, Star Trek has never presented either as absolute. The franchise prior to the current era has shown us multiple examples of Starfleet failing to live up to its high ideals. We don't learn much about Starfleet as an institution during classic Trek. It basically exists to provide some context to the adventures of Captain Kirk and the crew of the Enterprise. Who are these people? Where'd they get this ship? What are they doing, visiting all these planets? Oh, they work for Starfleet. Cool. Got it. We're told Starfleet is an honest, benevolent organization, and from what we can tell, that seems true. We meet a few Starfleet officers or other Federation representatives who don't seem particularly competent. Commissioner Ferris, Ambassador Fox, Commodore Stocker, and some, like Garth of Izar, Commodore Decker, or Dr. Richard Daystrom, who behave erratically due to trauma or psychological instability. But on the whole, classic Trek is more or less free of the scheming, evil admirals who will plague future spin-offs and morally questionable actions taken by Starfleet or the Federation. Except for the fact that Starfleet regulations include an official extermination order, but I mean, how unusual is that? Oh, did some of you not know about that? Odd how later shows, which made more of an effort to establish Starfleet as a benevolent and non-military force, never really mentioned it, but yeah, it's General Order 24, and we know about it because Kirk orders Scotty to carry it out in the first season episode, A Taste of Armageddon. As Scotty explains later in the episode, General Order 24 means that the entire inhabited surface of the planet will be destroyed. It doesn't actually happen in A Taste of Armageddon, but the fact that the order even exists, and that Scotty's reaction to Kirk giving the order is serious, but not exactly horrified, suggests that Starfleet isn't as benevolent as we generally assume it to be. I know, it's classic Trek, they were making it up as they went along. Subsequent entries in the franchise depict Starfleet acting kinda shady now and then too. There are the senior Starfleet officials who take part in a conspiracy to assassinate the Klingon Chancellor and the Federation President in Star Trek VI, Admiral Jameson from TNG's Too Short a Season, who illegally supplied weapons to both sides of a civil war, Admiral Satie, who leads a witch hunt aboard the Enterprise in The Drumhead, Admiral Layton, who led an attempted coup against the Federation president in the DS9 episodes Homefront and Paradise Lost, and there are other examples too. But those are bad apples. Individuals or small groups who were part of Starfleet, but who weren't acting with official Starfleet or Federation approval. You can't really blame Starfleet for the actions of Admiral Layton or Jameson or Satie, though until Picard baits her into going on an unhinged paranoid rant in front of everybody, she doesn't have any trouble recruiting people to help in her witch hunt, including Worf. There is something else that happens during the TNG era for which we can definitely blame Starfleet. It demonstrates that Starfleet, as an institution, is fully capable of abandoning its principles, that it's not as moral and upstanding as it appears to be. It's an official Starfleet action, or series of actions, really, the repercussions of which eventually affect the lives of characters in 3 separate Star Trek series. And it all starts in an episode from Season 7 of Star Trek The Next Generation, titled Journey's End. So Captain Picard's jerk-ass boss, Admiral Nechayev, shows up, and she's like, hey, we finally settled on a border with the Cardassians after that big war we fought with them off-screen at some point. And Picard's like, cool, you want some tea and finger food? And Nechayev is like, hey, thanks, you're all right, Jean. I think you mean Jean-Luc, actually. Whatever. One other thing, see how the new border puts some Federation planets in Cardassian territory? That seems like a pretty unlikely outcome, given how long we've been negotiating this. Not interested. Your mission this week is to go to one of those planets, Dorvan 5, and evacuate the colony there so the Cardassians can take it over. Isn't that the colony of Native Americans? Yep. We just need you to go there and kick them off their land. Got it? I feel kind of weird about, if you're not man enough to handle this, I can turn the Enterprise over to someone else. Maybe Riker? He's got facial hair, seems pretty manly. No, I'll do it. Cool, I knew I could count on you to wring your hands a little, but then ultimately just do as you're told. That's why you're the best. Bye! So they go to Dorvan 5, and Picard meets with the tribal council in charge of the colony, and he tells them, look, I know what's about to happen is a violation of some of your most basic human rights, but this is awkward for me too. And Anthwara, the leader of the council, says, well, we can't just leave. This is where we're supposed to be. When we got here, the mountains, the rivers, and the sky all told us this was our home. And Wakasa, another member of the council, says, Anthwara, he doesn't care about that. It's nothing but some quaint old great spirit shit to him. And Picard says, no, I have nothing but the deepest respect for your beliefs and everything your people have gone through. Now pack your shit and let's go. But the inhabitants of Dorvan 5 don't want to go. The Cardassians show up a few weeks ahead of schedule, and they're all like, what are you all still doing here? This is our planet. Pack your shit and get lost. And Picard's like, I already told him, man. They ain't moving. So Picard calls Admiral Nechayev, and he's like, they ain't moving. Can you call the Federation Council and ask them to just, let him keep the planet? And Nechayev says, dude, I asked the Federation Council already and they totally blew me off. You know what you have to do. So Picard calls Worf in and he says, go down and get ready to move those people out. We'll just beam them up or something, I don't know. Eventually, the colonists get fed up with Starfleet trying to run them off and Cardassians snooping around their village, so they take a few Cardassians hostage. There's a brief standoff, but Gulliver, the leader of the group of Cardassians, backs down and tells Picard, man, we just got done fighting a war against each other, in which I'm told I lost 2 sons, so it must have been pretty bad. Let's try to figure out a compromise. And the compromise they figure out is this. The colonists on the planets being ceded to the Cardassians in the treaty can stay on their planets, but they will have to live under Cardassian jurisdiction. They'll no longer enjoy the benefits of being Federation citizens. And Picard is like, Antoira, are you sure about this? The Cardassians, they can be real dicks. And Antoira is like, Cardassians, Starfleet, what's the difference, dude? I just want to keep my house. The Native Americans lose their Federation citizenship, but they get to keep their land, and the Enterprise leaves Dorvan 5, having narrowly avoided repeating one of the grimmest chapters of North American history. Oh, and also Wesley Crusher stays behind to study with the Traveler and learn from the Dorvan 5 colonists. I didn't mention any of that, but it is actually the A-plot of the episode, because God forbid they do a show about the plight of persecuted Native people without there being a white dude at the center of it, but it's not really relevant to the subject of this video. The Cardassian Treaty, and specifically the new border placing Federation planets in Cardassian territory, has repercussions that are felt across the Star Trek franchise for years. The Maquis is formed in response to the Cardassian occupation of these former Federation worlds. The Deep Space Nine episode that introduces the Maquis originally aired just 1 month after Journey's End. The Maquis would go on to be a major part of storylines on both Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Voyager when it premiered the following year. Captain Janeway is pursuing Chakotay and his fellow Maquis members through the Badlands when they're all yanked across the galaxy to the Delta Quadrant. It seems to me that the mere existence of the Maquis is more than enough to demonstrate that Starfleet wasn't always so admirable long before the events of Star Trek Picard. While they're usually depicted as occupying a moral gray area, at bottom the members of the Maquis do have a legitimate grievance. The Federation did give their homes away to a hostile neighboring power, and Starfleet did show up and say, okay, we can either relocate you or you can stay and live under Cardassian rule and we won't help you from now on. But because of that moral gray area, it is possible to see Starfleet's side of it. We're told the treaty with Cardassia was the result of years of difficult negotiations which followed a long and bloody war. As unfair as the terms were to the people living on the disputed planets, maybe it was the best deal the diplomats on both sides could come up with. And if displacing a relatively small number of colonists on a few planets is necessary to avoid reigniting a massive interplanetary conflict that could kill millions or even billions of more people, isn't that a compromise most of us would be able to live with? Doesn't mean the people forced to either relocate or abandon their citizenship don't have a right to be upset. They absolutely have that right. But if it's the least shitty option available, what else can you do? So, if the Cardassian Treaty and the forced displacement of Federation citizens that led to the creation of the Maquis was the only major flaw in Starfleet's good guy armor, maybe those of you who felt like Star Trek Picard ruined Starfleet and the Federation would have a point. Yes, the Federation and Starfleet compromised their principles. Yes, they took actions that directly harmed some of their citizens, but they were in an impossible position where no matter what they did, people would have been hurt. But the Maquis situation isn't the only major flaw in Starfleet's good guy armor. Just a few years after the creation of the Maquis, Starfleet attempted another forced relocation of a planetary population for far less justifiable reasons. Of course, I'm talking about the events of a little movie called Star Trek Insurrection. I did an entire video about Insurrection last year, so I won't go into too much detail, except to say that Admiral Dougherty's plan to forcibly relocate the Baku so he and the Sona can harvest the regenerative radiation from the planet's rings, while much smaller in scale than the involuntary evacuations and trading of territory in the Cardassian Treaty, is arguably even more inexcusable because the Federation isn't backed into a corner and forced to act from limited options. It chooses to force the Baku out of the homes they've occupied for who even knows how long, when it could just as easily leave them alone and tell the Sona to pound sand. Or whatever the space travel equivalent of that expression would be. Stardust? Warp particles? Pound warp particles, Ruafo. If Insurrection had been a Voyager movie rather than a TNG one, that line would definitely have been in there. Anyway, once again, the Federation, through Starfleet, has decided to attempt to forcibly displace the defenseless population of one of its own planets. And while Admiral Dougherty is the only member of Starfleet we see trying to carry out the plan, and for that reason it's tempting to write this off as another example of an evil admiral going into business for himself, Dougherty makes it clear that he is acting on orders from the Federation Council. The Federation and Starfleet want him to do this. And really, that's the only thing that makes sense, given what else we learn about the planned relocation in the movie. Unless we're supposed to believe Dougherty was able to just, order that holographic duck blind installed above the Baku village without telling anyone why he needed it. Besides, if Dougherty were just another rogue admiral, would Picard have gone through the trouble of changing out of his uniform before setting off to stop Dougherty and the Sona from abducting the Baku? Picard doesn't officially resign from Starfleet, but there's some fairly obvious symbolism to the fact that as soon as he's done trying and failing to reason with Dougherty, Picard goes to his quarters and removes his rank pips. In order to do the right thing in this situation, he can't act as a Starfleet officer because this time, Starfleet is on the wrong side. And again, this is just 4 years after the events of Journey's End. It's as if Starfleet and the Federation learned absolutely nothing from what happened on Dorvan 5 and the trauma and violence caused by its callous disregard for the rights of its own citizens. Yes, it's suggested that Dougherty hasn't exactly kept Starfleet Command or the Federation Council fully informed as to the details of the Baku operation, and clearly Ruafo is worried enough about what will happen if they find out what's really going on that he sends his ships to stop the Enterprise from contacting the Federation. But how in the dark can we reasonably assume the Federation Council are about the Baku mission? Maybe the Council doesn't know about the secretly beam everyone into a holographic simulation of their village so we can steal their magic radiation and render their planet uninhabitable without them knowing about it bit. But they have to be aware of the plan to relocate the Baku on some level, don't they? And it's that bit which is really the problem. Finding out about Dougherty's deception and Ruafo's brutality and the fact that he's motivated by a personal grudge against the Baku would make the mission impossible to support, you'd think. But even without those complicating factors, it's still a state-sanctioned operation to remove people from a planet where they've lived peacefully for hundreds of years because the government freely decided it needs their resources more than they do. Doesn't that seem like the sort of thing humanity is supposed to have grown out of by the 24th century? If we accept the company line, the Federation is the place where the rights of all people are equally respected, and Starfleet is the organization that defends those rights. It should be protecting people from being driven off their land, not driving them itself. Yet twice during the celebrated golden TNG era, the era the creators of the current Trek shows supposedly know nothing about, we find Starfleet and the Federation doing just that. Not evil admirals, not traumatized starship captains going rogue, but officially sanctioned operations. Now, look, I'm not trying to argue that the world isn't noticeably bleaker and there isn't a higher degree of skepticism regarding the benevolence of the Federation and Starfleet during the current era of Star Trek, Discovery, and Picard so far, with more on the way. Hey, scientists, let's get on that COVID-19 vaccine so we can start production on that Captain Pike spinoff. And also save millions of lives. But I think we're talking about a difference of degree here rather than a difference of kind. It's not that Discovery and Picard dented the spotless, shining armor of Starfleet. It's that they chose to focus on the dents that were already there. The themes of corrupt or immoral government, of leaders or institutions betraying their own supposedly cherished ideals are a lot more prominent in the newer shows, but they've been part of Star Trek all along. And, by the same token, the notes of hope and optimism might be less prominent in the new shows, but they're still there, and they're still important. One of the major themes of both Discovery and Picard so far has been that even when our leaders or our institutions fail us, the principles they were intended to stand for can still be upheld and defended if enough people, with enough courage, are willing to fight for them. Even when times are tough and the world is a mess, there's always hope. To quote a character from that other sci-fi adventure franchise, whether or not Starfleet is actually the bad guy depends greatly on our own point of view. If we sympathize primarily with the Maquis or the Baku, then when Star Trek Picard reveals that Starfleet has acted so egregiously in violation of its own principles that Jean-Luc Picard had no choice but to resign from the service, we might be struck by the severity of it, but we're not seeing anything we haven't seen on a smaller scale before. If, on the other hand, our sympathies lie first and foremost with Starfleet and the Federation, and we view those institutions as the exemplars of justice and equality and enlightenment which they themselves claim to be, we might be shocked to see them depicted as organizations capable of implementing a policy as fearful and unjustly discriminatory as the synth ban, or abandoning people who need help in the face of a looming humanitarian catastrophe. Our instinctive reaction might be to reject that depiction, to declare, no, that's wrong. Starfleet would never do that. In order to make that declaration and believe it, you have to disregard all the times when Starfleet has done things like that. But hey, if that's your reaction to that part of Star Trek Picard, that's fine. It's your opinion, and you have a right to it. And ultimately, it's just a TV show. Turn a blind eye to the sins of Starfleet, insist they don't count. It doesn't matter. What really matters is how we respond when a real-life institution, for example, a powerful nation state like my own country of the United States, violates its professed values. When we see discriminatory policies enacted against groups of people who pose no actual threat but have been vilified through prejudice and fear. When we see our government abandoning its responsibility to provide sanctuary to immigrants and refugees, some of us reflexively push these things away. We don't want to have to deal with them. We tell ourselves, no, it can't be as bad as they're saying, because my country wouldn't do that. That's not who we are. And in order to make that declaration and believe it, you have to disregard a lot of stuff. See, values are important. Principles and ethical standards are important. They're our way of telling ourselves who we ought to be. We profess those values in all kinds of ways, through government, through rhetoric, through art. Fictional institutions like the Federation and Starfleet are a way of telling ourselves these values are our values. These institutions are what our institutions could be if we only cared enough and worked hard enough to make them that way. There is an aspirational quality to Starfleet, and I don't deny that it's been a significant factor in the appeal of Star Trek to many fans, myself included. But long before the events depicted in the Picard series, we've seen that Starfleet isn't perfect, that it doesn't always live up to its values. The synth ban, the abandonment of the Romulans, those are cruel, ignorant, inexcusable acts, but they're also consistent with the darker, dishonorable side of Starfleet and the Federation that we've glimpsed several times before. You might not want Starfleet to be capable of doing such things, but we've known for a long time that it is. And that's not accidental. That's not inconsistency. That's not bad writing. That's the point. Because the best writers of Star Trek have known that, yes, values are important, but they're only really our values if we're actually trying to live by them. Hey folks, well, that's my look at the question of whether or not Starfleet is the bad guy. Hope you liked it. I have something to tell you about the next Regulation Trek Actually video, the next 2 Regulation Trek Actually videos, as a matter of fact. But first, let me do some patron shout-outs. Your local Nebraskan, thank you, your local Nebraskan. The Loneliest Monk, thank you, the Loneliest Monk. Gary, thank you, Gary. David Cumming, thank you, David. King VMR 1285, thank you, King VMR 1285. Zach Cody, thank you, Zach. Derek Makita, thank you, Derek. Andre von Schobreck, thank you, Andre. Mark Lewis, thank you, Mark. Maria, thank you, Maria. Matthew Scharnweber, thank you, Matthew. Mental Ward, thank you, Mental Ward. Corey CJ, thank you, Corey. Glenn Helwig, thank you, Glenn. Matt Levens, thank you, Matt. HRH Chrissy J, thank you, Chrissy. Michael J. Ingram, thank you, Michael. Alexander, thank you, Alexander. Andreas, thank you, Andreas. Connie Walker, thank you, Connie. Don Subert, thank you, Don. Liam Murphy, thank you, Liam. Nicholas Spitulski, thank you, Nicholas. Town Crown, thank you, Town Crown. Amber Bamberger, thank you, Amber. Roger Dietrich III, thank you, Roger. Josh Colson, thank you, Josh. Kevin Robert, thank you, Kevin. Eugene Frazier, thank you, Eugene. Kevin B, thank you, Kevin. Alan Porter, thank you, Alan. Rob Chauncey, thank you, Rob. Darth Muppet, thank you, Darth. Patrick Wilson, thank you, Patrick. Leo Bazalski, thank you, Leo. Ananda Billings, thank you, Ananda. And NH5316, thank you, NH5316. Once again, so many new patrons. Thank you all so much. You can become a patron of this channel by making a monthly pledge of any amount from $1 on up. $5 a month or more gets you a shout out like those folks I just thanked. Any amount gets you access to the polls where you can vote to choose upcoming Trek Actually topics. If you want to support my work and help me continue making videos, go to patreon.com/Steve Shives. Also, don't forget that besides doing YouTube, I also co-host a Star Trek-themed improv comedy podcast called The Ensign's Log, where myself and Jason Harding play low-ranking officers serving aboard a certain famous Federation ship as it carries out a certain historic 5-year mission. I think you see where I'm going here. We're now in our 3rd season. It's been so much fun. A lot of you have been listening and enjoying the show, and Jason and I are so happy about that because we love our show. If you haven't been listening and you want to check it out, the links are in the video description. You can listen on SoundCloud, on the website, or subscribe via RSS using your favorite podcast app. Check out the Ensign's Log. Now, here's something a little different for next time. Typically, the topic that won the most recent Patreon poll would be the next scripted Trek Actually video. Next month, that will not be the case, because next month, there will be 2 scripted Trek Actually videos. No reason. There's just a topic I really wanted to do, and it didn't win the poll, so I decided to do it anyway, in addition to the topic that actually won. So first, in 2 weeks, In honor of Mother's Day, which was this month, and Father's Day, which is next month, there will be a video called Who Are Actually Star Trek's Best and Worst Parents? That's going to be a fun video. The topic was in the most recent poll, didn't win, so I'm doing it anyway as an extra video. Then, 2 weeks after that, will be the video on the topic that won the most recent poll. What is actually Star Trek's darkest episode? And that should also be a fun video. For such a hopeful, optimistic franchise, Star Trek has done some pretty bleak shows over the years, and we'll talk about a few of them, and I'll make fun of them a little to cut the sadness. The poll for July's topic goes up today, so if you're already a patron or you're thinking of becoming a patron, go to patreon.com/Steve Shives and look for the post with the link to the poll to vote. That's all for now, everybody. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves, be safe, and I'll see you next time.